Welcome to our deep dive, examining how the protein choices we make affect our long-term health.
We're analyzing a research study with a really long title,
I know, right?
Animal and Plant Protein Intake and All-Cause and Cause-Specific Mortality, results from two prospective U.S. cohort studies
Catch you.
published by researchers from Harvard and USC.
Heavy hitters.
This study looked at the diets and health of over 130,000 people for as long as 32 years, giving us a really comprehensive look at how protein sources relate to how long we live.
That's a lot of data. So what did they find? Did they find that eating more protein makes you live longer?
The study's findings kind of flip the script on how we think about protein.
Yeah.
We usually focus on the amount of protein, but this research says the source of that protein is really important for our health in the long run.
Interesting. So like two people could be eating the same amount of protein each day, but one's getting it mostly from plants and the other from animals, and their risk of dying over those 32 years could be totally different.
That's exactly what the study is telling us.
Okay, so spill the beans. What's the verdict on animal versus plant protein?
So they found that eating more animal protein, especially from processed red meat, was linked to a slightly higher risk of death, especially from heart disease.
How much higher?
For every 10% increase in calories from animal protein, there was an 8% increase in the risk of dying from cardiovascular disease.
Okay, so break that down for me.
So let's say someone's getting 20% of their daily calories from animal protein.
Like steak and eggs.
Sure, like steak and eggs. They'd be at greater risk than someone getting only 10% of their calories from animal sources, even if both amounts are considered normal.
Gotcha. You mentioned processed red meat being particularly bad. What about unprocessed red meat? Is that any better?
Unprocessed red meat was also linked to an increased risk of death, but the link wasn't as strong as with processed meat.
That makes sense. I guess it's all about how the meat is prepared and processed, right? Like bacon and sausage are loaded with sodium and other stuff that's not good for you.
You got it.
So should we just ditch animal protein altogether? Go full vegan?
Well, the study doesn't necessarily say we have to completely eliminate animal protein, especially if you're living a healthy lifestyle.
So like exercising regularly, eating lots of fruits and veggies, not smoking, that kind of thing?
Exactly. The link between animal protein and mortality was mostly seen in people who had at least one unhealthy habit, like smoking, heavy drinking, being overweight, or not exercising enough.
So if you're living a healthy lifestyle, you can still enjoy a steak now and then.
It seems that way, but moderation is key.
Makes sense. Now what about plant protein? How did that stack up?
Well, the study found a strong link between eating more plant protein and a lower risk of death overall.
So the more plant protein you eat, the longer you live.
Pretty much. For every 3% increase in calories from plant protein, there was a 10% decrease in the risk of death from all causes, and a 12% decrease in the risk of dying from cardiovascular disease.
Wow, so even a small shift towards plant protein can make a big difference. What kind of plant protein are we talking about here?
The study looked at a bunch of sources, including beans, lentils, nuts, and bread.
So basically, all the good stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. And it seems like beans and lentils might be the real superstars here.
Really? Why is that?
It could be because they're packed with fiber and have a really unique nutrient profile.
So for those of us who eat a lot of animal protein, can we just swap some of that out with plant protein and reap the same benefits?
That's what the researchers wanted to find out. They did a substitution analysis where they looked at what would happen if people replaced 3% of their calories from animal protein with the same amount of calories from plant protein.
Smart. And?
The results were pretty amazing. Let's say you're someone who loves their processed red meat.
Yeah.
Just by replacing 3% of their calories from processed red meat with plant protein, they could lower their risk of dying from any cause by a whopping 34%.
Seriously? That's huge. What about other kinds of animal protein?
They looked at that too. Replacing 3% of calories from unprocessed red meat with plant protein led to a 12% lower risk of death from any cause.
Still a significant drop.
Hmm.
What about chicken, fish, eggs, and dairy?
Replacing poultry with plant protein resulted in a 6% lower risk, and replacing fish with plant protein also showed a 6% reduction. Even replacing eggs with plant protein yielded a 19% lower risk, and substituting dairy with plant protein showed an 8% lower risk.
So across the board, swapping animal protein for plant protein seems to be a good move. It's really fascinating how much of an impact our food choices can have on our health. This study definitely gives us a lot to think about.
It really does. But what about specific groups of people? Did the researchers look at whether certain individuals benefited more from these dietary changes than others?
That's a great question. And it turns out they did. They looked at how lifestyle factors played a role in the relationship between protein intake and mortality?
They divided the participants into two groups based on their lifestyle: a healthy lifestyle group and an unhealthy lifestyle group. This allowed them to see if the impact of protein choices varied based on their overall health behaviors.
So let's dig into those findings and see what they discovered. Did they find any major differences between the healthy and unhealthy lifestyle groups?
You bet. Even though both groups were eating roughly the same amount of protein overall, there were some pretty distinct differences in their dietary patterns that probably explain why their health outcomes were so different. The folks in the unhealthy lifestyle group were eating more unprocessed and processed red meat, eggs, and high-fat dairy, even though their overall animal protein intake was about the same as the healthy lifestyle group.
So they were making less healthy choices even within the animal protein category. What about plant protein? Did they eat less of that too?
They were eating about the same amount of plant protein overall, but they weren't eating as much fiber, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains as the healthy lifestyle group.
It's like they were missing out on all the good stuff that comes with plant-based foods, even if they were technically getting enough plant protein.
Exactly. It shows that you can't just focus on protein intake without looking at the bigger picture of your diet. It's all about the combination of nutrients and the overall quality of your diet.
So how do these different lifestyle patterns affect the relationship between protein and mortality?
That's where things get really interesting. The link between animal protein and all-cause mortality, as well as the link between plant protein and all-cause mortality, were mainly seen in the unhealthy lifestyle group.
So it seems like your lifestyle choices can either amplify or reduce the impact of your protein choices. What about the healthy lifestyle group? Did they see any connection between protein intake and mortality?
Nope, not really. Even though there were differences in how much protein they ate, there weren't any statistically significant links to mortality in the healthy lifestyle group.
So it seems like living a healthy lifestyle can really protect you, even if your diet isn't perfect. But for those of us who aren't living the healthiest lifestyle right now, is there still a benefit to eating more plant protein?
Absolutely. Even in the unhealthy lifestyle group, plant protein was still linked to a lower risk of death.
So even if you can't magically transform your lifestyle overnight, making the switch to more plant-based protein can still make a big difference.
Exactly. It highlights the fact that no matter what your lifestyle is like, adding more plant-based protein to your diet can be beneficial.
The study also looked at people with diabetes. Did they find anything different in that group?
They did. The links between animal protein and all-cause mortality
Yeah.
and plant protein and all-cause mortality were even stronger in people with diabetes compared to those without.
So it seems like people with diabetes might be even more sensitive to the source of the protein.
That's what it looks like. It emphasizes the importance of getting personalized dietary advice, especially if you're managing a health condition like diabetes.
Now let's get to the juicy part, the substitution analysis. What did the researchers find when they looked at what happens when you swap out animal protein with plant protein from different sources?
That's where things get really exciting. They found that replacing just 3% of calories from processed red meat with plant protein led to a 34% decrease in the risk of death from any cause.
Whoa, that's a massive difference.
It really is, and it shows just how powerful dietary changes can be.
What about unprocessed red meat? Did swapping that out with plant protein have a similar effect?
It did, but the effect wasn't as dramatic. Replacing unprocessed red meat with plant protein led to a 12% lower risk of death from any cause.
Still a pretty significant reduction. What about other animal protein sources like poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy?
They looked at those too. Replacing poultry with plant protein led to a 6% lower risk, and so did replacing fish with plant protein. Swapping out eggs resulted in a 19% lower risk, and replacing dairy led to an 8% lower risk.
So no matter what type of animal protein you're talking about, replacing it with plant protein seems to be a win-win. This study really highlights how important it is to pay attention to where our protein is coming from.
It definitely does, and it provides some really valuable insights into how our protein choices can impact our health in the long run.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the power of plant protein. It seems like this research could change the way we think about nutrition, both for individuals and for public health recommendations.
I think you're right. This study really encourages us to move beyond just thinking about how much protein we're eating and start focusing on the quality and source of that protein.
It's like we've been so focused on hitting our protein targets that we forgot to ask where that protein is actually coming from.
Exactly. And this study shows that it really does matter.
It also challenges the idea that animal protein is the gold standard for health.
I know, right? For so long, we've been told that we need to eat meat to be strong and healthy, but this research suggests that plant-based protein might actually be the better choice for longevity.
So what are some good sources of plant-based protein that people can easily incorporate into their diets?
Oh, there are so many. Beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, tofu, tempeh, the list goes on and on. And the great thing is that they're all packed with nutrients, fiber, and antioxidants that can help us live longer, healthier lives.
And they're so versatile. You can add them to soups, stews, salads, smoothies, you name it.
Exactly. There's really no excuse not to give them a try.
This research really empowers people to take control of their health and make changes to their diets without feeling like they have to overhaul everything.
It's all about making small, sustainable changes that you can stick with over time.
Like swapping out that burger for a lentil loaf, or adding a handful of walnuts to your breakfast parfait.
Exactly. Little things like that can make a big difference in the long run.
This deep dive has been so informative. We've learned so much about the relationship between protein intake and mortality, the different types of protein, and the importance of lifestyle factors.
And it all boils down to this. Prioritizing plant protein is one of the best things you can do for your health.
I think you're right. So to wrap things up, I'd like to challenge our listeners to take a look at their own diets and see where they can make some small changes to increase their plant protein intake.
It could be as simple as adding a scoop of lentils to your next soup or swapping out your usual yogurt for a plant-based alternative.
Every little bit counts. And who knows, those small changes might just add up to a longer, healthier life.